Ellie woke up to the sound of her phone vibrating on her nightstand. She opened her eyes, squinting as the sun shined in through her windows. Rolling over to her side, she felt for her phone for a few minutes, knocking over her water bottle in the process. Finding it, she awkwardly turned on the screen, expecting a spam message. Her eyes slowly started to widen as she noticed just how many messages there were. 50 missed texts and 20 missed calls, all from both Michael and Elizabeth, as well as other employees at her station. "What the hell?" she said. Ellie was now awake, sitting upright. She frantically dialed Michael's number and put the phone to her ear. It only took one ring until Michael picked up.
"Ellie, thank God. I've been trying to reach you for over 2 hours now."
Sorry, I was asleep. Michael, what's going on? What happened?"
"Good God, Ellie. So worried about you. Jesus Christ. God, it's a massacre out here. Hurricane, get the hurricane. We need you out here. So many others. If you know anyone else, bring them out here. Just, oh God, find a squad member and try to find us when you get here."
Michael was hysterical and panicked on the other end. A massacre? Michael, what the hell is going on?
"So many are dead, Ellie. So many people are dead. Please. God, we need all the help we can get. Just get here."
With that, Michael hung up. Ellie threw her covers off and jumped to her feet. She threw on some jeans and a coat over her shirt. There was no time to look professional. Something happened, and she had to find Michael and Elizabeth. Throwing her door open, she quickly made her way down the hall and to the stairs, almost tripping. Holding onto the rail, she made her way down, making loud footsteps. In the kitchen, Sangson was making breakfast. He looked over, hearing the rapid footsteps. He turned to see Ellie around the corner. "Hey, Squirt. What's up?" "Dad, I'm sorry to just drop this on you, but something happened in Hurricane and we gotta go." Sangson gave a confused expression and dropped what he was doing and turned off the stove. "Wait, what? What happened?" Ellie opened the door to the house, yelling, "Apparently a lot of people are dead, and that's all I know. Come on." Sangson looked back and forth for a moment before putting his cooking utensils down. Ellie ran down the porch steps, breathing hard. What the hell happened, she thought. What was going on? Ellie, grabbing her keys, unlocked her car and got in. She buckled herself and turned on the engine. She looked up to see her father coming out through the door, waving to someone inside the house, presumably her mother or brother. She watched as he threw on an old coat and that looked to be from the late 90s. Sangson looked at her and waved his hand, letting her know to go on ahead. Ellie nodded and swerved out of the dirty driveway, kicking up dust. She peeled out of there faster than she would have liked. Sangson got into the old truck, throwing some kind of bag into the trunk. He got in and followed the same path behind Ellie. Ellie tried calling Michael again. All she heard on the other end was nothing but the same call back later message. She gripped the wheel in stress. What happened was the only thought going through her mind. What was going on? Ellie tried to turn on the radio to tune in the Carlton G, but the station wasn't working. There was all but static on the other end. They must have closed. This had to be bad. Really bad. Ellie tried to listen to other stations as well. All that played was music and nothing more. No news, no nothing. She reached down and grabbed her radio. She tried getting Michael's attention yet again. But once again, only static would reply. Ellie was now getting frustrated. She threw the walkie-talkie on the ground and looked up at the road. She yelped as she saw a large fire truck almost hit her. She swerved to the right and stopped on the side of the road, letting it pass. The fire truck wailed with its sirens, and from behind it came another 2 ambulances racing behind. Ellie held her breath. What happened last night was all she could think. After the vehicles passed, she shifted her car in the drive and pulled onto the road. She didn't care that she was going over the speed limit. She had to know what happened and find Michael. Ellie hit a hard right and passed the sign welcoming people in the hurricane. She had to immediately stop, for in front of her was a large collection of police tape, as well as squad cars and ambulances down the road. Holy shit. she said to herself. Grabbing her bag, Ellie threw open the car door and got out. She could now hear the sounds of police sirens and groups of people talking. She grabbed the side of her bag and approached the tape.
Hey, ma'am, you can't be here. This place is under private watch.
Ellie turned to see a large police officer approach her. He was holding a cluster of tape and looked to be in his early 40s. Ellie stiffened and reached into her bag. She pulled out her ID and showed the officer. My name is Ellie Woods. I'm with HPD. What's going on? The officer lowered his tone.
My apologies. Oh, and what happened? Ma'am, we have no idea. But this town, it was painted red last night.
Ellie stiffened. How many lives were lost?
Too many, kid. Too many.
Ellie let out a shaky breath. May I enter, officer? Ellie looked at the cop's badge. Clay was written on it with dark black letters. May I enter, Officer Clay? The cop let out a sigh and held the tape up for Ellie to walk under.
Kid, I hope you don't get queasy easily, but go ahead.
Ellie held in her words and walked in under the tape. Ellie began to walk down the empty road. She followed the sounds of sirens and people. She looked around, seeing squad cars stationed everywhere. Cops were patrolling the area, searching houses and whatnot. Ellie saw people on their porches and people talking with other officials. She turned down the sidewalk, hearing the sirens get louder and louder. She had to find Michael and Elizabeth. That was now on her mind. Ellie began jogging and then turned into a sprint. The commotion got louder and louder. What was she about to come across? How bad was it? How many were actually dead? It wasn't long, however, until she found out. Ellie rounded one last corner and stopped dead in her tracks, looking down the road before her. She stared wide-eyed at the scene. Blood. Lots of blood. On the road, on the houses, and the grass. It looked like someone took a large can of red paint and just blew it up. Police cars lined the street in random patterns, all while the flashing lights. The stench was foul. It was the smell of rotting flesh and meat. Ellie stood there for a long while before finding the strength to move forward. As she did, the world felt slow. She felt like she was non-existent. It was just her and the world before her. She looked around, seeing it all closer now. Body bags. There were body bags everywhere, all different sizes. Families sat on their porches crying, and kids sat alone without parents weeping. Ellie looked to her left. People sat on the sidewalk and in ambulances, wounded and hurt. The world slowly came back to her, hearing the cries and curses from the injured. Ellie saw those being treated all talking and disgusting. Amidst it all was one woman who was crying her eyes out. Ellie stopped and looked at her. A fairly young woman with a beautiful brown hair sat on the sidewalk, huddled into a ball, sobbing. Ellie walked over and knelt beside the poor woman. Ma'am, are you okay? Are you hurt? Do you need anything? The woman didn't look up. She just sat there, weeping and mumbling. It took Ellie a second to make out what she was saying under her sobs. When she figured it out, her heart sank into her stomach. It took my baby from me. It took my baby from me. It took my baby from me. Ellie stood with an ache in her stomach. She wanted to help, say anything to ease the woman, but she couldn't find the words. She looked around herself now, taking in everything. What had attacked these people? Ellie saw the houses now. Windows shattered and doors torn down. There were even sheets over the fences with blood stained on them. Ellie slowly made her way around some vehicles to see more of the carnage. The other block looked the exact same. Blood along the streets, body bags, and people all in distress and panic. Ellie then noticed something far off. She decided to get a closer look. Walking down the street, she saw more of this carnage. Ellie could faintly make out the disaster within the bags. They looked bloated and full. Stuff with probably more than just a body. Blood, maybe? Maya! Ellie was suddenly grabbed. She yelped and looked into the eyes of a complete stranger. The stranger suddenly let go. Oh, my apologies. I thought you were my wife. Before Ellie could reply, the man wiped his nose and moved on. Ellie watched him for a moment before continuing on. Poor guy probably lost his wife and didn't even realize it. Poor soul, she thought. Ellie finally came up to the object that she was examining from afar and realized what it was. It was a turned over and smashed cop car. The car's left tire had been torn off along with its doors. Blood smeared the inside of the vehicle. Ellie had to look away when she noticed the guts and organs that lay down the floor. She couldn't shake it though. She knew it deep down. She turned back and looked at the organs. The teeth marks. The same ones from before. Ellie shook and felt tears well up in her eyes. Her hometown. What the hell did that thing do? Ellie shoved her hands into her pockets and turned away from the scene. She walked with her head down, trying to find someone she recognized. The cold air hit her once more, and her wet tears began to sting like daggers. Ellie! A voice yelled from behind. Ellie turned around and was suddenly embraced by Michael. She immediately hugged back, and she started to cry softly as the two held each other. They stayed like that for a long while. Ellie lifted her head up and looked into Michael's worried face. I was so worried about you. I thought you went home last night. God, Ellie, your whole apartment complex was attacked. Only 6 survived. Ellie wiped her tears. Michael, what the fuck happened? Michael held Ellie tighter. She felt his tears hit her forehead. Ellie had never seen Michael cry before. Christ, Elle. There's so many dead. How many? Currently. God. 20 adults. 28 children. Multiple pets and animals too. And we're 6 officers down. Ellie shook, feeling colder than she already did. 53 people? Are you kidding? Please tell me you're kidding. There was suddenly the sound of tire tracks skidding from their side. They both looked up to see Sangson's red truck skid to a stop. Sangson got out from the passenger side, looking white as a ghost. Ellie let go of Michael and ran to her father, hugging him. 53 people, Dad. 53! Sangson held his daughter back firmly. I know. I talked with one of the officers down the road. Michael walked up to the pair. Mr. Woods, he said with his hand outstretched. Sangson looked up at Michael and had a relieved face. Thank God, Sangson said as he took Michael's hand, pulling him into a hug. How have you been, kiddo? Sangson said. I've been all right. Until now, Michael replied. I get that your sister is okay. Yeah. She's down the block talking with some others. Come on, we need your help on this. Michael let go of Sangson and turned and began to walk down the block. Sangson and Ellie followed right behind. Walking past a few police officers and state officials, Ellie and Sankson found themselves walking to a massive town group, all chattering and discussing. Ellie stood on her tiptoes to look past the crowd. She saw Michael making his way towards the center. "Hey, Mike," Ellie said as she began to enter the crowd. Thunder roared in the distance as soft rain began to pour down. Ellie shoved her small body through the large crowd. She was pushed and shoved back as larger bodies began to shuffle in between. Men were yelling and women were screaming. It was as if the whole town had gone mad. Could she blame them, though? Making one last push, Ellie entered the clearing surrounded by barricades. In the center were a few police cruisers as well as the whole squad from HPD. Ellie saw Michael chatting with a few officers and Elizabeth. Ranger was sitting underneath the cruiser panning. "Michael!" Ellie shouted. Michael looked over and waved to her for her to come over. Ellie hurdled the barricade and took a long stride towards the group. Elizabeth turned to Ellie with a tired face. She wasn't even wearing makeup today. "Hey, Elizabeth." "Hey, dear." Ellie looked around at all the investigators. She noted and recognized all of them. Yet, someone was missing. "Hey, where's Welsh?" "Dead," Michael said. "He was one of the victims from last night," said Elizabeth. "Christ." Ellie turned and saw her father with a worried expression. Ellie bit her lip and looked around. "It was here, Michael." "I know." "What's the game plan? What are we gonna do? A whole town is in shambles." Michael turned and pinched his nose. "Currently, we have a whole hunting group in the forest following a blood trail. It consists of a few local hunters, FBI, and a few officers. They're following a large blood trail, and they're determined to kill, well, whatever it is." Sankson stiffened. "There's people out there following a trail? Are they out of their mind?" he yelled. "I didn't make the decision, Mr. Woods. It was the state's orders. They're calling it a Class 10 threat. Believe me, I'm worried about them, but they're armed, and hopefully can take it out." Elizabeth adjusted her throat. "Look, I don't want to be that person, but look around ourselves. Over 50 are dead, Michael. 50. I know I said that I wanted to rationalize this, but god damn it. The people are all saying that there was a monster. I'm not certain if a few firearms are going to stop this thing." "Your sister's right, Michael. Those people don't know what they're going to encounter," said Ellie. Michael took a long breath and reached out the pet ranger. "Let's just get to evacuating the civilians, all right?" "Said Bill, what you think it is out here?" Tim said, loading shells into his shotgun. "To tell you the truth, Tim, I say it's just some deranged criminal. No animal can do that kind of carnage. And frankly, I want to put it down." Bill took his rifle from his backpack and proceeded to load it as well. Rain began to pour down from the clouds above with a sharp crack of thunder. Tim unhooked the radio from his belt and turned into a frequency. "South Eagle, this is Tim, over."
South Eagle's responding. Got something?
"Negative. Was checking on your side. North Badger's got anything yet?"
Negative. Keep searching. Those FBI guys driving in large black sedans could scare away that monster. I don't know what they're thinking.
10-4, South Eagles. Tim hooked the radio back onto his belt. "He couldn't have gone far," said Bill. "The blood trail led into these woods. They can't be far off." "That's what they all say." The pair walked further into the woods, examining the area carefully with stained eyes. "You know, Tim, 15 years in the police force, and this is the first murder case I've done. It's shocking knowing this town's history." "Don't start talking about that Chuck E. Cheese bullshit place, Bill." "I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that this town has had a bad history with accidents and murder. Like, it dates back hundreds of years." Seriously, no wonder why Hurricane's off the fucking maps. Can you blame them for ignoring this place, Bill? I swear, this town just needs to get paved over. Like every other tragedy that this town has covered up. You said it. After all this is sorted out, I'm moving to New Jersey. Why New Jersey? It seems more interesting than here. Bill stopped in his tracks, causing Tim to walk straight to his back. Tim stumbled backwards. Cross, Bill, why the fuck did you... Tim looked past Bill and followed his gaze. Tim first noticed the blood. It was pooled along the dirt and leaves. It looked fresh. Tim followed the blood trail with his eyes as the blood began to lead up a tree. It was smeared all along the trunk as it got higher and higher. Tim felt vomit boil in his stomach as he gazed into the tree. There, strewn and impaled on the branches, were several bodies. 5 in total. They had been mangled and torn apart. Clear bite marks covered their bodies as well as large puncture wounds. All of the life had been drained out of their eyes as they swayed in the wind, lifeless. Tim turned around and let out his breakfast onto the floor. Bill, with one shaky hand, reached down and began to unhook his radio. He turned it on and tried to dial into the line. Nothing but static responded to him. Come in. Anyone? We found the victims, good God. Can anyone please read me? Tim was wiping his mouth and looked over at the nightmare before them. He proceeded to walk over to the tree. He looked up, examining the bodies, shaking. What the fuck, Bill? Bill's radio crackled to life.
Wait.
It said. The others were coming. Tim set his shotgun on the ground and knelt down, grasping one hand around the other. He leaned his head down and began to pray. Father of all, we pray to you for all those whom we love but see no longer. Grant them eternal rest. Let light perpetual shine upon them. May his souls and the souls of all the departed through the mercy of God rest in peace. Tim stopped mid-prayer and looked at the bloody leaves. He squinted, looking at something from within them. Something green poked out. Using one shaky hand, he took hold of the item. Pulling it out, he realized it was a large chunk of green fabric that looked to have been torn off by something. Looking at it on closer examination, he saw what appeared to be a button poorly sewn onto it. Was it a piece of clothing? No, it was too large, too stiff. Tim flipped it around and saw pins and dark crusted blood protruding from the other side. Tim looked around more and noticed more of the fabric on the side of the tree. He placed a large piece down and reached for the other parts. Pulling the newfound piece out, he recognized it as a crusty green glove type thing that looked to have been split apart. It had the same pins and dark blood. These parts felt old and dirty. Tim couldn't figure out if they had come from the victims above or from something else. Bill stood pacing back and forth. He couldn't shake the fear of what they had found. What sick bastard would do such a thing, he thought. These thoughts raced through Bill's head. He walked over and leaned against a tree, pinching his nose. All of this was hard on him. The whole situation had been eating at him. He was thankful to be alive, but the idea of young innocent lives being taken was too much for him to bear. Bill put his rifle on the floor and slinged his bag around and over his shoulder. He unzipped the bag and began to rummage through it. All the fear had made him extremely hungry. Digging through, he pulled out a large granola bar. Bill unwrapped the bar and slowly raised it to his mouth. Bill took one bite, then another. The bar was really dry. It wasn't gooey or sticky. It was rock solid. and a pain to chew. Before he could take one final bite, Bill felt something hit his hand. It began to slide down the side of his palm. Bill lifted his hand up to see what had just landed on him. A black, slimy ooze drizzled down from his hand. It looked like a mixture of saliva and what seemed to be blood. Then another splotch hit him on the shoulder, and then another. Before he could say anything, he heard something that sent fear into his heart. A guttural growl came from above him. Bill slowly turned his head to look up. Bill only saw it for a split second before the massive creature jumped down upon him. Before he knew what was going on, he felt something sharp rip into the side of his gut. Bill screamed as he felt his intestines get violently ripped out from within him. Tim turned around hearing the commotion. He froze seeing the sight. On top of Bill was a massive green monstrosity. Tim shook in place seeing the beast lurch its head up from his best friend's side. What Tim saw shattered his reality. It was a large, burnt rabbit that had dark red flesh emerging from its mouth in a tendril shape. Tim could see a rib cage from within the beast with visible breathing lungs. He could make out elongated bones with melted metal within it. Tim watched as the monster opened its jaws, revealing rows of human and non-human teeth. From its mouth came out smaller tendrils that proceeded to jab into Bill's mouth and eyes. Tim snapped out of the trance and screamed Bill's name. Bill screamed back in a gurgled plea for help. Tim reached down and grabbed his shotgun. Without thinking, he blindly shot at the monstrosity before him. The creature recoiled from the shot and went sprawling backwards. The monster let out a deafened wail as it crashed to the floor. Tim ran over to Bill's side, kneeling beside him. Bill, oh my God, Bill! Tim shook his friend, but he was already long gone. Tim looked up, hearing the sounds of four-wheelers and dirt bikes entering the clearing. It was the other hunters that had gone out to find the culprit. Oh my God, what the fuck is that? One of the men shouted as he grabbed his gun. The other men looked on in confusion and fear as they gathered their weapons. As Tim held Bill's lifeless body, he heard the sound of groaning and bones snapping. Tim turned to see the monster getting back onto its feet in a spider-like motion. The monster stood tall and eyed the hunters with a snarl. The hunters all began to open fire on the monster, but instead of recoiling like before, it stood taking the bullets. The creature lifted its arms, taking in the crossfire, as if it were accepting the pain. Tim now noticed the large bony muscle on its hands laced with mechanical parts, all dripping black ooze. The creature coiled its head back and looked to the sky. It bellowed out a loud wail that caused the whole squad to drop their weapons. Tim watched as long, flesh-like tendrils sprouted from the monster's sides. The tendrils hit the ground and then rose with a smooth intelligence. Tim saw the tips of the tendrils morph and shift into a bone-like claw. The monster quit its wailing and looked down at the now staggered group. The creature lurched forward, sending its tendrils outward. Tim ducked and rolled to the side. The tendrils swung around and proceeded to stab a few of the hunters while others were cut down and decapitated. The monster let out grunts as if it were trying to laugh or cough. Fuck this! One of the hunters yelled, getting onto their four-wheeler. They pulled out as the other hunters began to meet their fates. Tim got up and sprinted away from the chaos. He heard his fellow men scream in agony and fear as the monster claimed each of their lives. One by one, Tim heard them all fall. A cut here and a splatter there. Tim ducked and dove behind a fallen tree. He breathed in and out with a tight chest. Tim clutched his weapon close to his chest. He felt sweat pour down his face. The thunder crackled once more, lighting up the forest. Tim tried to load shells into the chamber, but shook violently. He couldn't do it. He stopped hearing the sounds of a man gasping. He slowly turned and peeked out to look. It was a massacre. Bodies lay all around, broken and split apart. And in the center was that thing. It held a young man by the neck. The man squirmed and struggled in the creature's grasp. Tim looked on as the monster unhinged its mouth and proceeded to clamp down the man's head. There was a loud crunch and a scream, but it all fell silent immediately after. The monster dropped the headless body to the ground and stood hunched. The creature suddenly began to heave and breathe heavily. The monster's tendrils rose up and slammed into the earth. The creature began to shake and shift. Tim watched as the monster fell to its knees and hands. It began to wheeze and throw up a dark liquid. What was happening, he thought. There was suddenly the sound of popping and snapping. What Tim saw now was more of the creature's inner flesh burst out and begin to wrap around its legs and arms. He saw the bones shift from within the suit as it began to grow, not by much, but it was visible. The creature's legs were now more flesh and bone than suit. It pulsed as a black fluid wrapped around its mechanical parts. The monster lifted its head up and took in a breath of air. It proceeded to stand. Its new flesh had added another foot or two onto its height. The monster's legs were now bent backwards, like a dog's or deer's. The monster sniffed the air. It was still hungry. Tim ducked down and began to silently pray. He prayed for it to leave, for it to just go away. All he wished for was to just live another day. His prayers weren't answered, however. He tucked himself into a ball as he felt warm, wet breath hit his neck. The last thing he thought about before the end was the hope to see Bill and hopefully have a good drink in the afterlife. Ellie sat with a young girl. She held her arm and tended to the poor girl's wounds. She couldn't have been no older than 7. The girl didn't say a word. She was stock still and only blinked. Ellie tightened the bandage around her arm, lacing it in a firm clip. She gently set her arm down and looked at the girl. Poor thing, she thought. She didn't seem to understand what happened, or if all about what had attacked her. Who wouldn't? The rain roared, leaving everyone to sit under tarps and tents. The sky began to dim from the now covered sun. Ellie sat back in a metal chair, rubbing her head. She didn't entirely know how to feel. Scared, concerned, sad, or maybe just a mixture of them all. "Hey," Michael said, coming inside the tent. "Hey," Ellie said back. "Do you mind if I sit?" "Not at all." Michael wiped the rain from his hair and grabbed a chair, leaning it up against the wall. He fiddled with it until the chair folded out, almost clipping his fingers in the process. He lowered the chair and set it firm on the ground next to Ellie's. Michael then took off his jacket and took a seat. "So, how are you holding up?" Ellie didn't reply. She just rubbed the small girl's head, trying to comfort her eerie stillness. "Sorry," Michael said. "That was a dumb question." No, it's alright. I was just spacing out. To tell you the truth, I just feel something. I'm not sure what, but it's something. Michael settled into his chair. "Same, to be honest. This whole situation is genuinely terrifying. I spoke to the locals and, yeah, they all described the same thing that Vanessa saw. A large green rabbit. Well, at least now we know she wasn't making it up. Never said she was." There was a long silence after that. They listened to the rain hit the tent without a say in the matter. They both just collected their thoughts on what to even say. You know, after all this is said and done, well, if it ever is, Would you like to get some coffee with me during one of these upcoming weekends? Ellie blinked and looked over to Michael, her face flustered just a tad. You mean, like a date? Michael looked away. Well, if you want to call it that, then I just... this is all a lot. I think we just could use a break after all this is over. Ellie's lips slowly curled into a smile. Well, guess it's a date then. Michael and Ellie looked at each other for a long moment, just kind of lost in each other. There were no words, just the soft silence. The silence was broken, however, as Sankson entered through the tarp. Hey, I'm gonna... did I interrupt something? Ellie shook her head. No, we were just talking. Anyways, what's up? I'm gonna run back to my place and get some more medical supplies for the folks. And I may as well grab your mother's van to help get people out of here. I'll be back in about 30 minutes. Alright, Dad. Okay. Don't do anything reckless while I'm gone. Ellie gave a thumbs up and Michael just nodded. Sankson left the tent and walked back into the rain. There was a long few moments of silence. Eventually a cop came in and escorted the young girl out to another tent, which left Michael and Ellie alone. The pair chatted about the smaller things in life, mainly about childhood and other sorts of memories. Eventually the topic came up about what Ellie had in her backpack. Say, what's in that pack you always carry? Michael said. Oh, it's nothing, just a few essential items like snacks, water, and... Oh, right. Ellie swung her pack around and placed it on her lap. She took the zipper and opened it up. Michael looked on in confusion as Ellie grabbed hold of something and began to pull it out. When we were in Fazbear's Fright, I was kinda... well, I don't know why, but I took this. Ellie pulled out the wooden crying mask from the fire. I just had the urge to take it. It was like it was telling me to. As weird as that sounds. Michael held out a hand and took the mask from Ellie. He brushed off the slight char marks and looked into its empty eyes. Hey, I remember this thing. Always found it to be the creepiest one. I'm surprised its face held together. What is it? Ellie asked. It was this teenage-sized wooden puppet. I think my father called it Charlie. I know my mother called it, like, the thing, and it's just disgusting from what I know. But all I know is that it freaked out all the employees. One of them said it was always thinking. Interesting, Ellie said. So, what prompted you to take this again? I don't know. Like I said, it was just like calling out to me. It's like when I was younger and saw a toy I really wanted. I just don't know how to describe it. Ellie took the mask back and looked at its charred face. So, when do you want to go on that... Their conversation was suddenly cut short by the sound of a whistle being blown, along with the sound of a distant four-wheeler. Ellie and Michael looked at each other before getting to their feet. Ellie stuffed the mask back into her bag in the process and slung it over her shoulder. What does that mean? Ellie said. It means not good. Michael opened up the flat to the tent and quickly walked out with Ellie in pursuit. There was a cluster of people all looking towards the woods while an officer stood whistling while an orange stick glowed in his hand. Ellie looked past the crowd and towards the woods. There was a four-wheeler coming from the trees. The sound was unmistakable. Michael took out his radio and turned onto the dial. Elizabeth, what's happening? What's going on? Where are you and Ranger? The radio glitched and no reply came. Shit, Michael said. No reply? No, she's with Ranger. I don't know where they are. Look! The person shouted. Through the rain, everyone could see the headlights of a four-wheeler. It was coming out through the trees and fast. Something's wrong. Where are the others? Shouldn't there be more? Ellie said. Michael didn't reply. He just looked on and was reaching for his sidearm. The four-wheeler suddenly jumped the tree line and entered into the open field. People gasped as the vehicle crashed into the ground, throwing the rider into the cold, wet grass. The vehicle hit the ground hard and went crashing into multiple pieces. Ellie began to back up. "Michael?" she said. Michael stood his ground, looking on intently. The man in the field was suddenly knocked down by something. The rain was too heavy to see what had exactly hit him. The cops stopped in their stride and pulled out their weapons. Everyone watched as a large red rope of sorts came crashing down onto the man. His scream echoed outward into the storm, and he was suddenly lifted into the air by an appendage. Ellie's heart sank, and Michael's confidence suddenly faded. People already started to run and freak out, while others couldn't look away from the carnage. From the mist came two more flesh-like ropes. They wrapped around the man and began to pull on his limbs. The last words that came out of the man's mouth were, "Run, you idiots!" And with that, they all watched in horror as the man was torn into 3 solid pieces. Everyone was now in a panic. Michael yelled out something, but Ellie couldn't hear him over the sounds of her rapid heartbeat. One of the cops that was near the man began to run, while the other 2 began to open fire on the clouded threat. The cops yelled slurs to each other as whatever they were shooting at wasn't affecting it. Ellie, Michael, and some others watched as the assailant emerged from the misty fogged storm. Walking out from the storm was the monster that Vanessa and the others had talked about. A large, soaking wet rabbit costume emerged from the trees. The features from what they heard were now changed, and not what they were expecting. The rabbit's mask was now hanging loosely open, and protruding from inside its mouth were rows of flat, human and then jagged teeth. Blood smeared down from its chin. Its flesh was pulsating. The creature's chest was halfway costume, but halfway bone, flesh, and metal. Its ribcage was broken in different places as jagged metal laced it in a locking pattern. Rotting lungs were visible as they were still breathing. Its arms had the same effect. It started off as a costume but soon emerged into a fleshy, boned arm with claws. The same could also be said for the monster's legs. Long, slimy, and jagged. The creature's eyes fixated on the cops before they rolled back into its head. The creature let out a deafened wail as it looked to the sky. Long, spider-like tendrils whipped out around and proceeded to stab and cut into the cops. Their screams were cut short as their heads fell to the ground. "Michael, we gotta go!" Ellie screamed. "I know! Get to the cars!" The monster looked up to the chaos that surrounded Ellie and Michael. The beast lurched back and screeched. Michael took Ellie by the hand and began the sprint. People rushed into their homes while others dove into the tents. Others simply ran like bats out of hell. The monster got into its hands and began to quickly and violently crawl towards the chaos. Ellie turned around to get another look at the beast. The thing was now practically galloping towards them. Ellie screamed, which in turn caused Michael to tighten his grip around her hand and sprint faster. The creature took one large leap and crashed into the tents. The monster screeched as it got entangled within the wires and fabric. Grabbing onto that said fabric with its tendrils, the monster tore open the tent to free itself. It rolled for a moment before standing to its feet. Before the people around the monster could react, it began its assault. Michael and Ellie heard the screams of agony as they rounded the corner. They heard the sounds of flesh tearing and bones snapping. They turned to see a few lucky people sprint past them. They were petrified and in disbelief. Another man rounded the corner, but was suddenly snatched by the leg. The man fell to the ground and grabbed onto anything he could. "Oh God, no, no!" he screamed. Michael turned to Ellie. "Get to the car!" he said as he threw his keys into her hands. Michael turned on his heel and dove for the man that was now being dragged away. Ellie screamed out for Michael, but he didn't listen. Michael grabbed the man by his hands. "I got you," he shouted. "Oh God, don't let go, man. Please, God. Oh God." Ellie slowly walked backwards, unsure if she should help or run to the car, like Michael said. Michael held onto the man, trying to free him from the monster's grasp. "You're gonna be okay. We'll get out of this." Michael tugged, almost freeing the poor soul. The man had a glimmer of hope in his eyes. Yet before the man was freed, a sharp tendril shot out and stabbed him right into his skull and out in between his eyes. "No!" Michael shouted as the man was yanked back into the rain. Michael fell backwards, hearing the loud crunching sounds in the distance. He began to crawl backwards, hearing these noises. He turned to see Ellie, still standing and watching. "Run!" he screamed. Ellie snapped out of her trance and turned. She ran like hell, all the while with tears streaming down her face. Michael turned back around to hear the wet snarl, followed by a grunt. He sat there, shaking with fear. His legs didn't move. His body was like a statue, with its eyes wild and crazed. Out from the rain came the large rabbit. It lumbered forward. Large bloodied claws clapped the street, and out emerged the tattered face. The mangled rabbit looked at Michael. Visible bullet wounds could be seen around the mask. Blood dripped out from inside the jaw that was too human for comfort. Michael looked into the monster's pale eyes. They were fixated on him. The monster began to crack its neck until it fully began to unhinge. It leaned forward, close to Michael's face. Michael felt tears welled up in his eyes. This was it. This is how it would all end. He felt the warm breath of the monster hit him. It was foul, rotten, the smell of death. Michael closed his eyes and let the waterworks come. The monster began to touch him. He felt the warm, wet slime of the creature's tendrils wrap around his arms. Michael began to make his final thoughts about his sister and Ellie. He waited for the sharp teeth to clamp down on him, but nothing happened. Rather, he felt something else. He felt something slim and sharp brush his face, wiping away his tears. Michael slowly opened up his eyes to look. Michael was still on the ground with the tendrils loosely wrapped around him. There, touching him, was the claw of the monster. Michael looked into the eyes of the beast. There, looking back at him, was not the pale eyes of a monster, rather the sorrowful green eyes of a person. The creature cracked open his jaw and let out two raspy words. Michael shook, not knowing what to make of this. The monster slowly let go of him and backed off a tad. The two looked at each other for a long moment. It felt familiar. Suddenly there was the sound of a car alarm going off. Michael turned. Ellie, he thought. He turned back to see the large monster now recoiling itself. The once green eyes had reverted back to a cold, pale white. The creature lurched around and let out a deafening wail. Michael covered his ears and felt something large gallop over him. He looked to see the monster disappear into the rain towards the parking lot. Ellie. Ellie cursed to herself as she dropped the keys. Michael's car began to let out its horn. Ellie knelt down searching for the keys, but the rain was too heavy. She couldn't find them. She turned her head, hearing the sound of the monster wail. She knew Michael was dead. She could feel it. The ground began to shake. The beast, the creature, the Wendigo, it was coming. She looked around for a hiding spot, anywhere where she could hide. There was no time. She ran over and rolled underneath one of the abandoned cars. She tucked herself into the center underneath the vehicle and waited. The ground shook more violently as the monster grew closer. She almost screamed when the creature leaped from the rain and landed on Michael's car. Ellie watched as they began to tear the vehicle apart. It crushed the roof, causing the windows to shatter. The car's alarm began to die down as the monster crushed the engine. How was this thing so strong? It was like watching a horror movie. She watched as it used its tendrils to lift the vehicle up and throw it aside. She heard it crash down and burst into flames. The monster stood and screeched at the flames. Ellie watched as it stood its ground and looked on at the fire. It was as if it were transfixed. She then heard a new sound emanate from it. Sniffing. The monster crouched and began to sniff the parking lot. Ellie held her breath as it did so. The monster sniffed the floor, crawling like a spider. It suddenly lurched back up and grunted. Its tendrils emerged and crashed down onto another vehicle. Without ease, the car was thrown into the air, and so was another and another. It knew she was near. Ellie shook as the beast threw car after car. Ellie covered her mouth, trying not to scream. It was getting too close. Too close for comfort and for her safety. She closed her eyes as she heard the loud footsteps approach. She waited and waited. Nothing. She sat there for a good minute. All the sounds of chaos and damage had suddenly ceased. Ellie opened her eyes to nothing. She slowly uncovered her mouth. It was gone. All that was left was the damage it had caused. She let out a shaky breath of relief. Suddenly, a sharp, fleshy claw burst out from under the car. Before Ellie could scream, the car was lifted into the air, revealing her back out into the open. Ellie turned and looked up at the massive, fleshy, burnt monster. The rabbit. It threw the car aside and turned to face Ellie, its eyes blazing with hunger. Ellie began scooting away from it as it began to move forward. Ellie reached into her bag, looking for something to defend herself with. She hadn't brought her utensils. She cursed under her breath for that. She grabbed a few chip bags and chucked it at the creature. It wasn't phased. The beast's jaw began to unhinge and crack open. Ellie watched as the sharp wires seeped out from its mouth. "Fuck, fuck, fuck," she said under her breath. She pulled out an old sweater and threw that at the monster. Of course, that did nothing as well. She backed up against the car with nowhere to run. The monster shot out a sharp tendril that wrapped around Ellie's leg. She felt sharp daggers go into her flesh. She screamed as it began to drag her towards its mouth. She tried to grab hold of the pavement or anything, but it was too strong. She felt her body lift into the air and be dangled upside down. Ellie looked into the jaws of the beast. Sharp metal and flesh met her gaze. It was over. It was all over. She closed her eyes and tried to think about something happy to numb the reality of it all. "Please," she said. She felt her body being lowered downward. It was all over.
The mask.
A voice rang out in her head.
Show it the mask.
Ellie opened her eyes. She was about a foot away from certain death. Acting fast, she leaned up and grabbed her bag. She reached in and pulled out the wooden crying mask. She closed her eyes and faced the mask towards the creature's mouth. She didn't know why, but she trusted the voice and her gut. Ellie felt herself stop moving. A low grumble came from the mouth of the creature, then a hiss. She felt the tendril let go and she hit the ground hard. Ignoring the pain, she opened her eyes to look at the monster. It had backed up a few feet. Its eyes weren't focused on her anymore. It was now looking at the mask. It was afraid of the mask. Ellie crawled over and picked it up. She then held it up in one hand to test her theory. The creature howled and crawled backwards. Ellie, without thinking, began to crawl towards it, mask in hand. The beast screamed and began to jump back. As she crawled, it was as if she were being held up by multiple people. She felt hands push forward. It was like something was telling her to keep going. Ellie screamed at it and proceeded to chuck the masks towards the beast. The monster howled and turned on its heel, sprinting back into the forest like a coward. Ellie looked on, stunned and dazed. That energy she felt was now gone. She was suddenly weak and tired. She looked at her leg. Sharp purple spikes were now lodged into her skin, causing some kind of infection, similar to Vanessa's. She reached down and tried to pluck them out. They were stuck. She turned to look where she had thrown the mask. It laid in the parking lot, being doused in rain. She crawled towards it. It was her protection. Her vision was fading. She crawled up and grabbed the mask, dragging it towards her chest. She turned to face the sky. She was so exhausted. She couldn't think. Sleep, she thought. She was so tired. The last thing Ellie heard before dozing off was the sound of Michael screaming her name. He was alive, she thought. We were alive. Sleep took hold of her after that. She didn't know where she would wake, but she hoped it would be anywhere but where they were now.